You're tuned in to The Last Radio Show.
Hello and welcome to The Last Radio Show. I'm John Lynch.
I'm Jenn Reilly.
And this is a show where we talk about all kinds of stuff, pop culture, history, news. We're talking about something that was big news about 5 years ago, and I guess now is history, even though it's still kind of around. Do you know that it's been 5 years now since COVID happened?
Yes. I
is
can't
that
believe
crazy
it. It's
or is
crazy.
that insane? That is just amazing.
It's unbelievable how time flies like that.
Yeah. It's really hard to believe that it's been actually 5 years now since COVID started. So I thought we'd look back.
Okay.
And, you know, I guess when people talk about COVID, they really talk about 2020.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, COVID's still around. People still get COVID. You know, it's not gone. It's not nearly obviously as bad as it was in 2020 when it was first spreading around the world. But I got a little bit of history of the start of the pandemic, and then we'll talk about like just life during the pandemic.
Okay.
So it started, as we said, in 2020. It actually started in 2019 was the first recorded cases in late December of 2019. Mm-hmm. It started, as best we can tell, over in China.
Right.
And it spread throughout the world, came over to the U.S. in early 2020. There was one or two cases in February. Then around March is when it really exploded.
Right. And I mean, overnight it seemed, however,
yes.
I think we were misinformed about that, but
we probably were, you know.
We didn't know how bad it was, but maybe no one did.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the guy who was president at the time, we won't mention who it was because spoilers for later, but he said, there's one case, there's one person in February, he said this.
Right.
There's one case in the U.S. It's somebody who just came from China. It's nothing to worry about. And then about a month and a half later, the whole world was closed, essentially. So, I mean, it is amazing and very scary, obviously, too, how quickly it spread.
It really was. I mean, no one could have predicted that. I really don't think.
Right. No, nobody saw this coming, definitely. You remember, like, the thing I remember, like, most, like, first off, you remember when they called it the coronavirus more than COVID? Mm-hmm. That kind of went away. COVID became the more popular name.
Yeah, I think that does happen. Like, something all takes hold and you're like, who calls it coronavirus anymore?
Exactly,
you know?
Exactly. I'm sure the Corona beer people appreciated moving away from that because that was like, I remember that was a joke. I had a Corona t-shirt I used to wear during the pandemic.
Oh boy!
And you know, because I was that cool. But you know, that was when it first started. We didn't really know too much about it, but the actual disease is COVID-19, and there was a lot of misinformation even about the 19 because people are saying, "Well, what about COVID-18? What about COVID-19?" Was just the year it started. That's what the 19 means. There wasn't like variations.
Oh, hello! I didn't know that until just now.
That was a lot of people didn't know that. They just assumed there were different variations on the disease, but it was called COVID-19 because the first documented cases were in 2019.
Okay.
So it started, like I said, in late 2019 in Wuhan, China. Is where they think it started. And there was a lot of misinformation, and we still don't really know exactly what happened.
Exactly. Never will. I mean, no, I don't think.
Probably not. I mean, there was rumors about the story initially that I think most of us heard was bat soup. Remember that they said there were people eating bat soup, and that is probably how it got into, because apparently this disease originated in bats.
Yes.
And that people would eat bats in that part of the country of China, in Wuhan. And this was a delicacy, and that's how it got into...
Sounded like an urban legend.
It sounded like an urban legend, and it probably is from what people are saying. The best scientific... And, of course, there were rumors that this was a chemical attack, that China was doing this on purpose. Or there was the rumors that it was being looked at a lab and lost containment. It was an accident. Right. So, or
even created and then lost. Or even created and lost.
So the nearest thing that most experts can kind of say, and again, we don't know for sure and probably never will, but that it did originate in bats and it did jump into the human stream through the food chain, but probably other animals eating bats and then us eating those animals.
Oh, scary.
Yeah, so it's like there was probably a chain that led to it getting into the human population.
Right.
Again, nobody really knows for sure. And a lot of things are very, very up in the air about the numbers of this too. We don't really know how many people really were affected by it. It was worldwide. A lot of countries keep very different records than the U.S. A lot of countries like China kept their records very tightly sealed. Russia did the same thing. They didn't put out like numbers like we did here at the U.S. on a pretty regular basis.
I would think the way it spread, it would be pretty global as to how it affected everyone. I mean, it really couldn't. It was just like a storm that took over the whole earth.
Right. I mean, as of 2023, when they did the last big count of the actual pandemic, not talking about people who have died since of corona, because people can still get sick from it and pass away, but during what was considered like the lockdown period, it's estimated that it could be anywhere from 18 million to 35 million people who died.
Wow.
Which is a pretty big wide, there's only about 7 million that we can definitely say absolutely because we have, documented proof of this.
Right.
But again, it's considered at least 2 or 3 times that number. And
anecdotal in my own little circle, my aunt passed away and it was quick and it was unbelievable. She was healthy. She had a sniffle. She said she feels better. And within a month she passed away.
Right.
But out of a couple of my friends, 3 of us lost people close to us. And the other 2 actually don't have a lot of family. So anecdotal, it had to hit just exponentially,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, the one thing about it is when they talk about when the pandemic was going on and it was disproportionately affecting older people.
Yes.
And there is the part like, well, they caught COVID and, these were people who were sickly anyway.
Right.
And then COVID was kind of like the knockout blow kind of thing.
Right.
Their immune system was weaker. They had other health issues. And and to get COVID on top of that.
Yes.
Where COVID might have been the thing that technically killed them, they were in bad shape on their own.
And there was certainly truth to that.
Absolutely. But still,
Still. And I knew young people that died from it too. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
No, it's absolutely. Did you catch it during the pandemic? Did you actually test positive for COVID?
At some point, but I was already vaccinated and it was like later on.
Right. Yeah. I don't think I've had it twice that I know of. Again, you don't really know, and we're not testing as much as we used to back in the day. We still
test. We're like crazy. Not now, but we tested way after people were like, you're still testing for that?
Right. I definitely tested after I got I caught it after I got vaccinated, but a very mild case. It was, essentially a cold. Right. But and that's, the good of the vaccine too is, it doesn't necessarily prevent it, but it does help you fight it.
Yeah, but the weird thing about that is my sister wasn't vaccinated when she caught it, and she had the most mild case that you've ever seen. Milder than mine. So that was the other problem. Everything was just, there was no clear-cut, solution to this.
Right.
Or,
absolutely.
It was just crazy.
Right. It absolutely was. And, of course, the thing that was fascinating about it was how quickly it became a political issue.
Oh, of course.
And, we mentioned Donald Trump was president the first time when this broke out in 2020 and early 2020 here in the U.S. And there was a lot of non-information, I would say, especially in the beginning. They didn't even want to acknowledge it for a while. Back when the AIDS crisis was happening, Ronald Reagan very famously did not say the word AIDS until several years after the AIDS pandemic started. Because he just didn't want, it didn't affect his base because, it was gay people or drug users who were getting it.
Right.
And, he didn't want to deal with that. But I think Trump didn't want, he just wanted to focus on hey, everything's great because I'm president. Right. And, which, thankfully we got over that and we'll never go back to that again. But, and then of course there were the people who became kind of celebrities because of it. Of course, Dr. Fauci became the best known person in the U.S. at one point.
By the way, I used to hang on his every word. I mean,
I think we all did.
Whenever he was speaking, I was like,
I think we all did. Yeah. And, it was fascinating because as this became more of a political issue, to some people he became the villain. And to some people, he was the hero.
Oh, yeah. Still.
And yeah, still to this day. And essentially, he was just a guy who was a doctor who said, like, you know what, you should wash your hands and cover your mouth when you cough. And, I mean, that was like, don't get into big groups because this spreads pretty quickly.
Right.
That was where, do you remember like when the shutdown started, like what you did like the days before and like, how you got ready for it?
No, we did not get ready for it. There was an event at my children's school that was for parents only, like a girls' night out.
Okay.
And we were all debating, should we go? Yeah, we're going to go. And we all went to this big party.
Right.
And then people left and like went and bought toilet paper from CVS after a couple of drinks. They were like, let's go get toilet paper. Like, it was just this absurd thing.
It really was surreal.
And then the kids just never went back to school. But it was literally that Thursday. I think school shut down on Friday.
Right.
Like, ooh, maybe we should not have gone to that party.
Right.
It's crazy.
I actually went to a family party the weekend before. Like the family got together. It was one of the kids' birthdays, and
Were you considering not going? Or was it at that point?
Originally, the party was supposed to be held at a place,
okay.
like it was, and then and there was going to be other kids there and stuff because it was a younger child, only 3 or 4 years old, and that part of the party got canceled. But we still got together as a family at the house, so it was a smaller group, and it was just the immediate family. But we were all like, "Oh yeah, they're talking about we might, have to shut down for a week." Right. Remember, that was the talk week, maybe 2 weeks at most. That
all the teachers left their stuff in the classroom.
Right,
it was like, that was it. They never just went back.
Yeah, how old were your kids when the shutdown happened?
I'm trying to think. How many years? This is 5 years?
5 years ago, yeah.
So I had like an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 5-year-old.
Right, so they were kindergarten through like 5th grade, about that kind of thing.
Yeah, my poor little one, Maddie, she was in kindergarten, went to school with a mask on her first day of school. I have the picture. It's so sad. Yeah. With the little behind the screen. Oh.
Right. Now, my son was actually in his senior year of high school.
Oh.
And he was supposed to go, like, his senior trip was supposed to be like 2 weeks after, like, the shutdown started. Yeah. So, he, again, like you said, he went to school in April, one day in February or March it was when it closed.
March, yeah.
And, we thought it was going to be like, I remember they were talking like, well, this is going to be the winter break now. We're going to make this the winter break, and, we'll make up at the end of the year. We'll figure out, the days that we're missing, Which,
by the way, when would that have made sense? Like, there's a global pandemic. We're going to shut down for a week. Like, thinking about it now, it makes no sense. But...
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Well, if you all just hold your breath for 10 minutes, we'll be fine.
Exactly. It's going to pass over.
Yep, exactly. This stuff just kind of lingers in the air.
Yeah.
And, but he never went back to school after that.
Yeah. He missed graduation.
He missed graduation. They did do like a social distancing graduation.
Right.
Like a month later after what would have been his normal graduation, but it was like, they broke it up into very small groups, and like everybody, it was just us and him sitting at like a couple of chairs, and like 6 feet in either direction from us was another kid. So it was very different and very, very bizarre.
Yeah. But people were pretty resilient in terms of like what they did. There was all of a sudden there were birthday parades, like for kids' birthdays, right? Yep. They would do a drive-by of their house.
The drive-by, yep.
And I used to, every morning, write like a positive, inspirational message and chalk on my driveway and my sidewalk, to try to keep morale up.
Do you remember the Gal Gadot Imagine song that went on social? Of course, Gal Gadot was Wonder Woman.
Okay.
And she did a video that they put on YouTube where it was her and a bunch of other celebrities singing the song Imagine, because she was trying to say, hey, you know what? We're all in this together.
Oh, I don't remember that.
You got to look it up. It's very cringy. And, her heart was in the right place, I will say, I do believe. But, everybody was like, yeah, it must be really tough sitting in your mansion.
Right. Because, that's right. Remember that whole thing?
Yeah.
How we're all in this together, except some are in a dinghy and some are in a yacht or something.
Exactly.
Right.
John Krasinski did a weekly show where it was like Good News, I think it was called, or that was very popular on YouTube.
Oh yes, I remember that.
Yeah, and he was, he's doing that, and that was a lot of fun, and and people, but he was in his mansion, he was, and he was like the rest of us were like, well, I don't know if my job's still going to be there when this is over.
Yeah. Did you do any like socializing on Zoom or anything like that? We did that a couple times.
We did a couple of things. I remember it was my mom's birthday, and we did like a drive-by thing for her birthday. Like I remember we all stopped, and like everybody stood like in front of my brother's house where my mom lives. Right. And we were all like, like groups of like the family were like all like 10 feet away from each other. Yeah. And we're like waving happy birthday, and it was just very bizarre and very, very weird. But
yeah. I mean, some of the moms would do that. We would meet in a parking lot when we had enough of just being home. I mean, I really did love being home with them, but sometimes you need a break. So we would meet in a parking lot of school, and everybody would like open up their hash bags and like a wine cooler. And that was it.
They did try and do things. Remember when sporting events came back and they didn't have fans in the stands? Oh, so they had they played like a baseball season in 2020, but they had cardboard cutouts of fans. Yes! You could actually send a picture, and they would make a cardboard cutout and put you in the stands.
Oh, that's right. Unbelievable.
Very, very bizarre, and it was almost a year really before things got completely back to normal from the shutdown.
Yeah, at least a year, right?
I mean, things got better as we got into the summer. Restaurants started opening with the outdoor dining. Remember, that was such a big thing.
That changed everything too.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of a sudden, you were allowed to eat in the parking lot, and it was all the rules went out the window.
Right. Or if you got takeout, they would like come out and put it on a table, and like you would go get it. It was like it was like you were in this. It was like a science fiction movie. Yeah, it really was.
And you could actually go to a bar and get a drink to go.
Right.
And not that you could drink in your car, but like go. Right. That would never. Right. That's not even illegal.
Yep.
It's just wild.
Yep. And like what we're doing right now, we're doing this remotely. We're in two separate locations. Everybody was doing stuff like this.
Work was all remote, right? Anyone who was working.
Zoom must have made a fortune.
Oh, forget it.
Because
maybe they started the
maybe pandemic. They did. If anybody benefited from it, it was that.
Incredible.
Now, just think if it had happened 20 years earlier. Before smartphone technology really took off, and before we all had this ability to do this remote stuff, it would have been a very different story.
Sure, it'd been like Little House on the Prairie at that point. Basically,
yeah. I mean, we were still all kind of connected, but just very different kind of connection. There was no personal connection.
You're right.
But I mentioned this in the beginning, but the thing that always struck me the most about it, and talking about it, and I working at a radio station, I did the public affairs show, and I did a lot of shows about COVID where I was talking with different people, and people in the government, people in the medical field, and stuff like that. The things that they kept saying was like, well, make sure you wash your hands, make sure you cover your mouth when you cough, and I'm like, really? Do we have to be reminded of that? Are people like just like coughing in other people's faces on a regular basis?
Yeah.
I mean, I never really thought about it before, but I mean, is that really an issue?
No, but actually, think of how dirty we were before that. I remember you and I would sometimes come into a studio with you, and there would be like a sign say, "Wipe everything down."
Right.
We wouldn't be there together, but we would like trade off and.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, we're really dirty normally.
Apparently. Right. Which a lot of, and the thing that was interesting too is how much the environment changed, in terms of nature. There was like things like how, because there was so much less traffic there, that like nature started to make a little bit of a comeback.
Yes, which was the positive.
Yeah, and
for sure.
We beat it back down again afterwards.
Of course, right?
Because that's what we do. That's what we do as humans. But they were saying that the canals in Venice had dolphins swimming in them because the water was cleaner, because there wasn't it wasn't commercial boats going through the area.
And the air was clean.
The air quality got cleaner, yeah. And people, you could. The one thing I think a lot of people thought, like, well, you can't go out, but you could go out. You just couldn't get in contact with people.
Yes, but a lot of people did things to like conserve things too. We were very, very big into conserving. Like I remember my friend was growing her own herbs. And she was like, don't throw that out. And like, it was like a very, you wouldn't throw groceries out because you couldn't get groceries. Right. You had to eat everything.
Absolutely.
So those lessons were great. Again, they fell by the wayside, but good lesson.
Right. And you mentioned the toilet paper, and there was a toilet. People were hoarding toilet paper at one
by
time.
the way, my mother's basement might still have COVID toilet paper, I'm sure.
Yeah, you can never have enough. You got to make sure you stock. They were actually rationing it at stores. They would have you could only buy so many rolls at a time, and and that continued even after things opened up because there were supply shortages afterwards because everything had shut down.
Right.
So
and nobody knew why it was toilet paper. Like it wasn't a stomach virus disease. Like what was the toilet paper about?
We knew where people's priorities were. They're
right.
like, you know what? There's
when it's going down.
Yeah, when it's going. The other thing that really benefited from the pandemic was streaming services like Netflix and Disney Plus and all that. They really took off because there were no movies.
Right.
There were no movies in movie theaters.
No movies being made. Right. No movie theaters. Gyms shut down pretty much completely.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there were so many businesses affected.
Right. And then of course the restaurant business lived on takeout, but a lot of the wait staff that they don't get tipped as much for that. And it's a completely different dynamic. Do you remember the first time you went to a restaurant after the pandemic?
I don't actually.
I distinctly remember we went out to one restaurant. I think it was after my son's graduation, which was later in the summer, and they just started reopening some of the restaurants and. It wasn't warm enough that night or it was raining or something. We couldn't do the outdoor dining thing. But they had plexiglass partitions around every table. Every other table was not being used.
Right.
So, everybody had masks on. We had masks on that when the waiter would come over, we put our masks back on.
Who was cooking your food, by the way?
You
out of sight, out of mind.
You don't think about things too much when you're in situations like that. But, and then, of course, then the vaccine came. Mm-hmm. And, that was late 2020. And, of course, by the way, while this was all going on, we had a presidential election, too.
That I don't even remember.
No, it was not many people do. Right? I mean, it was just kind of blurred in there. And, of course,
did we vote in person?
You could vote in person. I voted. They had early voting and mail-in ballots, which became very controversial. And, of course, there are people who are supporters of Donald Trump say that's why he lost that election is because there was something funky going on there. And, of course, that's still something that comes up when people talk. But I remember going to like a week before the election to vote. And we were spread out, again, we were waiting online, but, it was a line where everybody was social distanced.
I remember that, yes.
Yeah.
There was I think there was dots on the floor. You couldn't
Sometimes when you go in a store, you'll still see the little markers on the floor.
Oh, yes. And then some of the aisles in the grocery store were one way.
Right. One way grocery store aisles.
Oh, my God, I forgot the Cheerios. I cannot go backwards. I got to go all the way around.
I got to completely loop around to get the Cheerios.
I forgot about that.
But you still see some signs and some things like some remnants of this lost age kind of thing, and and you see some businesses that didn't make it out of the pandemic that are still closed up and haven't been come back, But and then of course online shopping took off too.
Oh yeah,
it was taking off anyway, but that became the standard.
Even the grocery stores all started delivering and whatnot.
Yeah. Yep.
Did you do anything inside your home that you would normally never do? Like we cleaned stuff that I don't think we ever even knew we had. Right?
I think we like. I know we did like a lot of organizing of stuff, like and cleaning out like attic and and stuff like that. Which
did you bake bread? Everyone was baking bread.
Yeah, I think my wife did a lot of baking. She became very big on the baking and. Much to her chagrin because she doesn't like cooking that much. But, it was something to do.
Something to do, right?
Yeah. I do remember, there was one day, I distinctly remember I was sitting at the table and I was playing solitaire with a deck of cards. And my wife, Ellen, walks up to me and she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm playing solitaire." And she's like, "Really? I've never seen you play solitaire." And I'm like, "I don't think I've played solitaire in 20 years. I don't remember the last time I did. It just seemed like a thing to do. There was a deck of cards I found, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to play solitaire.
And haven't played since?
And I don't think I have since. Yeah.
Did you have puzzles? Puzzles were big too.
We did puzzles. Yeah. Board games, of course. That became the big thing. We would have a movie night. We would show my son who was in his teens. movies that we like, like the classics, stuff from like the 80s and 90s.
Right.
So, we watched a lot of that kind of stuff, so we always picked a couple of movies, that we would watch during the week.
Right. Now, you had a teenager that was able to drive, right?
Yes.
So that's different. See, my kids were young; they were out on the bikes and stuff. But
right,
was he able to socialize? And
well, he still worked because he worked at a supermarket. He worked at a store that sold food, so he was considered an essential worker.
Oh,
so he still worked, and again, it was less hours and not as much. But he actually, which was probably a good thing for him because he did go. But one of the things he did at the supermarket was he put the plexiglass up at the checkouts.
Oh, really?
Him and another guy were like, he said, like, we were like screwing these into like the side of the cash registers and stuff so that there would be like a barrier between the customers and the people who work there.
That's a story for his kids, right?
Yeah, exactly. Back in my day. And then, of course, there was the face masks. And, so we all had to wear the face masks. And,
I know.
And a lot of people, there was a whole stylish face mask thing going on. People, you would get ones that were kind of funky or funny,
Yeah. And then that was a point of contention with people. Some people were like diehard face mask people and others were like anti. It was the most insane argument. I mean, put them on. What's the difference? Take them off. I don't know.
It's. I don't think it was a plot to make you wear a face mask. I really don't. I don't think that was the end game in all this. And
I have to say, when we took them off, I was like a little nervous. My mother and I went to a grocery store. We had face masks on, we had gloves on and everything. And this poor little lady, she was going to take our cart and she said, she had nothing on, by the way.
Right.
And she's like, "Are you guys sick?" We're like, "No, we don't want to go get sick. Don't wear a mask." She was scared of us. And that's the other thing. Then you didn't know who to be afraid of. Like, if they had masks on, were they sick or they're not sick?
Right.
Well,
that was a lot of the misinformation. There was a lot of people said, well, I'm not sick. Why should I wear a mask? I'm like, well, no, this is to keep you from getting sick.
Right, yeah.
There was a disconnect with like why we were wearing the mask. Right. Were you wearing it not to spread it to other people, or were you wearing it not to get it spread to you?
Right. And then there was it was like mandated. So one day the kids went in, they said no masks. They were done. And then the next day they put the mandate back. So the next day they had masks on. So it was very confusing for everyone.
Right. Now, when did you first get the vaccine? Do you remember?
Well, actually, my mother and my aunt who passed, they were in the hospital. And I wound up getting an appointment. And I was worried because I had made my husband get the vaccine early because I said, we have older parents. If they need something, you have to be there for them. So we got it pretty early. I mean, he was essential, so he got it first, and I got it right when they opened it up.
Right. I actually remember, as I said, my son was working at a supermarket, so he was considered essential. So he was able to make an appointment pretty early on in the process and was able to get us to go with him. Oh, okay. So we got in there, even though we weren't essential workers, we were lucky enough. So we went to the Javits Center in New York City.
Yes.
And
I took my aunt there.
That was where they were doing, that was one of the first spots. We were very early on, and I think it was January 21, I think we got it, which was very early on when it first started becoming a thing. And I remember we took the train into the city, and it was a weeknight around 6 o'clock, walking through Penn Station, and it was empty.
No one was there. The city was empty then.
It was deserted. It was the spookiest thing you ever saw. And the one thing I do remember distinctly is that there were two people I saw walking across the concourse in Penn Station looking at their cell phones, and they almost walked into each other.
Oh God.
They just weren't paying attention where they're going. And there was 80 feet of empty space on either side of them.
Were they wearing masks? Do you remember?
They were wearing masks, but they just weren't paying attention to where they were going, and they almost just crashed into each other.
Oh, wow.
But when we walked from Penn Station to the Javits Center, which is, I guess like 6 or 7 blocks or whatever it is, and didn't pass another human being.
Wow. Did you have to wait online, though? Because the lines were pretty quick.
We did have to wait online. It went pretty quick. I mean, we went into there. They had, hundreds of tables set up with people giving the shots. And I do remember distinctly, I got to the point, I was sitting down at the table. The guy just swabbed my arm and was, doing the thing, the doctors kind of like flick
Yes,
the tip
to
of
get
the
the air
needle.
bubble out.
Yeah, to get the air bubble out. He had just done that, and a fire alarm started going off.
Oh, no.
And he's like, like he was literally just getting ready to point the needle towards my arm, and I'm like,
Please,
dude, just jab me.
Right.
I'll take the chance for the extra 30 seconds. Can you just stick me with it? But it turned out it was just, he's like, no, this happens all the time.
Oh, good.
And they put an all clear thing a couple of seconds later, and then they got it,
And then did you wait the 15 to 20 minutes?
You had to wait 15 to 20 minutes. They gave you a bottle of water, and there was a whole like holding area where you sat there.
Yep.
Got a little sticker that said, I got my shot.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, yep.
And then walked back to what Penn Station went home?
The walk back to Penn Station. Couldn't go anywhere. I think we might have got some food at like a fast food place in Penn Station, again, and had an empty train on the Long Island Railroad about 8 o'clock at night on a Wednesday night or whatever it was. Just nobody around.
It's just that we've saw things during that whole time that we will probably never see again.
Right.
Hopefully.
Right.
Really. But.
Right. And, I mentioned Dr. Fauci, and of course, there was the press conferences were hysterical when him and Donald Trump would do the press conferences together because they were telling two different stories about the same thing. And, remember Donald Trump infamously said, well, we're looking into injecting bleach into people.
Yes.
I mean, that was...
Right.
That was a moment.
Sometimes you got to know when to zip it.
Yeah, exactly. And there were times like where this guy who was the president was talking, and you see Dr. Fauci behind him just kind of like holding his head, just kind of looking. And the other politician who became very popular at that time was Andrew Cuomo. Here in New York State. Yeah.
I don't remember. Why was that?
He was considered to be handling the pandemic well over there.
Right.
But then there was the drama about the nursing homes that they didn't maybe report all the numbers about that. And there was a lot of drama about that. And then he had other drama after that.
And then Hochul took over during the pandemic as well, though.
It was like towards the tail end of it. Yeah, we were coming out of it at that point.
Yeah, okay.
But he was considered, one of the better governors in terms of handling, because New York State was one of the bigger states in terms of the number of cases in it.
And then do you remember that like states were competing for who had less and who had more?
Yeah.
If this worked and that worked, and it's like, guys, it's a pandemic. Like,
right.
You can't really quantify that, right?
Yeah.
I mean...
you also can't compare like New York State to North Dakota.
Right.
Because there's very few people in that state, and they're social distancing all the time because there's nobody near you. And you don't have an international airport where people are coming in and out from all over the world.
Yeah.
It's very different. But if you were in the middle America, you probably didn't feel it as much.
Of course, for sure.
But if you were living in New York or California, Florida, of course, had very high numbers too.
Do you remember when they came out with like one guy? They were like, Joe Schmo just infected 7,000 people. You're like, how do you know that this guy that went, I remember a specific story. He went to a funeral, then he went here. They tracked this poor man.
Right. Yeah. I think there was a term for it. I don't remember what they called
Super
it.
Super
spreader. Yes. Yeah. I think you're right.
But they gave his name out and they said this man went to all these places and spread it. It was terrible,
Yep.
Poor guy.
Yep. And, economically, it was devastating because there was nothing being made for a while. There was nothing, happening. People got laid off. People, businesses went under.
Yeah.
And then, remember we would randomly get some checks from the government too? That was kind of cool. I enjoyed that part. That was like, here's a couple of $1,000, buy something, because we don't care what you buy
Just
something.
Buy something, right?
Yeah, they should do that now. I miss that.
Yeah.
They should bring that back. Thank you for listening to The Last Radio Show. If you like the show, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review on your favorite platform. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram at The Last Radio Show. We will talk to you soon.
The Last Radio Show.
The Last Radio Show.